Get out of my chair. That's what my son-in-law said to me. Not asked, told. In my own living room. On my 68th birthday. I still remember the exact moment. I'd walked in from the backyard. I'd been filling the bird feeders, the ones Margaret had hung out there before she passed. And there he was, sprawled across my armchair like he owned it, feet up on the ottoman she'd reupholstered herself. He looked up at me for half a second, then looked back at the television. I said, "Get out of my chair," I repeated to myself later, standing in the kitchen staring at the kettle. Not your chair. My chair. I bought that chair in 1987 from a shop on Robson Street in Vancouver. I drove it home in a rented truck. I've sat in it every evening for 37 years. But I said nothing, not that night. That's the part I'm most ashamed of, looking back. My name is Bernard, Barry to the people who knew me before all this, and I spent 40 years as a civil engineer for the city of Burnaby. I built things for a living. Bridges, drainage systems, roads that still carry morning traffic while I'm sleeping. I am not a man who backs down from hard problems. But when my own daughter looked at me across the dinner table and said, "Dad, we're really struggling," I felt every one of those 40 years of certainty drain right out of me. This was February, 2 winters ago. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's all she is to me now, not a name, not a character in a story, just my daughter, had married a man named White 3 years prior. I'd had my doubts. Not the kind of doubts a father keeps to himself out of politeness. The kind that sit in your chest like a stone and don't move. Dwight was charming the way a car salesman is charming. Quick with a compliment. Quick with a laugh. And somehow, always the most important person in any room he walked into. But she loved him, and he'd been decent enough in those early years. They had a good apartment in Coquitlam, 2 incomes, a little dog named Biscuit that I genuinely liked more than I liked Dwight. Life seemed to be working. Then it stopped working. Dwight had been doing something in real estate. I never fully understood what, and I realize now that was by design. Something about flipping properties, something about a business partner, something about a deal that went sideways. By the time my daughter sat across from me with red eyes and cold coffee, they were 4 months behind on rent, and the landlord had given them 60 days. "Just until we get back on our feet," she said. 3 months, maybe 4. I looked at her face. My daughter's face. The same face that used to appear at my bedside at 2 in the morning when she had a bad dream, asking if she could sleep in the big bed. What was I supposed to say? "Of course," I said. "Of course you can." I want to be honest here, because I think it's important. I had a good feeling about the first 2 weeks. My daughter cooked dinner twice. Dwight helped me carry some boxes down to the basement. My granddaughter, she was 8 at the time, the brightest child I've ever been around. And I'm not just saying that. My granddaughter and I spent a Saturday afternoon building a birdhouse kit together at the kitchen table. And it was one of the genuinely good afternoons I'd had since Margaret died. I thought, maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe difficulty changes people. Maybe this is what family is for. I was not wrong about him. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment here. A request there. Nothing you could point to cleanly. Dwight started watching television in the evenings on the main floor, instead of going upstairs to the room I'd set up for them. Fine. That's fine. Then he started leaving his work. He'd apparently pivoted to some kind of online trading, though I never saw any evidence of income from it. Spread across the dining room table. Still manageable. I ate my breakfast standing at the kitchen counter, but by month 2, something had shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. He stopped asking. He started telling. He rearranged my kitchen so the coffee maker was on the other side of the counter because it was more efficient. He canceled my newspaper delivery without mentioning it to me, just called the number and canceled it. because he said I could read the same news online for free. When I pointed out that I'd had that paper delivered for 22 years and I enjoyed reading it physically in the morning, he looked at me with this particular expression: patient, slightly pitying, the expression a person makes when they've decided they're dealing with someone who doesn't fully understand how the world works anymore. "It's wasteful, Barry," he said. "We're trying to be more responsible." My daughter was working long hours at the dental clinic where she'd been a hygienist for 9 years. She left early, came home tired. I think she knew things were uncomfortable. I think she chose not to look directly at it. I understand that. I don't forgive it entirely, but I understand it. The 3 months became 5, then 7. I calculated at one point what they had cost me since moving in. I'm a numbers person by training, it's involuntary. Hydro bills had gone up by roughly $220 a month. Groceries, another $300. I paid for 2 car repairs when Dwight's Silverado had problems. He'd asked to borrow money and had never mentioned repaying it. A few smaller things here and there, the kind you can't quite remember individually. By the 8th month, I figured it was somewhere around $9,000, not including the value of the space itself. I hadn't asked for a single dollar back. This is the part I find hardest to explain to people who weren't there. Why didn't I say something sooner? Why didn't I put my foot down in month 2, or month 4, or month 6? The honest answer is this: it is very difficult to have a serious, boundary-setting conversation with someone who treats every attempt at that conversation as a personality flaw on your part. Every time I tried to raise something, the table, the schedule, the money, Dwight had a way of making me feel like I was being petty, difficult, like I was the unreasonable one for caring about the things I cared about. And my daughter was always somewhere in the background, looking uncomfortable, and I didn't want to put her in the middle of it, and so I pulled back. Every time. I pulled back until I had almost no ground left to stand on. My birthday is in October. October 14th. Margaret used to make a lemon cake, the proper kind with real curd in the middle, and we'd have her sister's family over and my old colleague Paul from the city, and it was never a big thing, but it was ours. After she died, I mostly let the day go quiet. Maybe dinner with my daughter, a phone call or two. That was enough. This year, my daughter said she wanted to do something special. "We'll have people over, Dad. Paul, the neighbors. A real birthday." I said I'd like that. I meant it. She organized it. Or she started to. But somewhere in the execution, Dwight organized it over her. He invited his friends, his trading contacts, a couple from down the block I'd never met, someone he knew from a hockey league in Port Coquitlam. He moved the furniture around to make the main floor flow better for a party. He bought the food, mostly things he liked, mostly expensive beer and charcuterie boards. He set up a Bluetooth speaker in the corner and connected it to his phone. When Paul arrived and asked where I wanted to sit, Paul and I had known each other since 1989. He knew the chair. I walked over to my armchair and found Dwight already in it, already mid-conversation with one of his friends. He glanced at me. "I'll be done in a minute," he said. Grab a seat at my birthday, in my house, in my chair." Paul looked at me. I looked at Paul. Neither of us said anything. I sat on the piano bench, the one against the wall, the one my granddaughter practiced on. It's not comfortable. My back reminded me of this within about 10 minutes. I sat on the piano bench at my own birthday party and watched Dwight hold court from my armchair, and felt something clarify inside me. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more definite than anger. An hour in, Dwight came into the kitchen where I was refilling the chip bowl. Because I'd become, apparently, the one handling hospitality. And he said without preamble, "We need to talk about the basement. There's some of your stuff down there I think we should clear out. We're going to need the space." "Excuse me," I said. "The boxes, old tools, whatever. My daughter needs a proper bedroom down there. She's getting too old to share a room." His daughter, my granddaughter, living in a room in my house. That's Margaret's things, I said. My voice was very even. I was surprised by how even it was. Those are Margaret's things in those boxes. I know, but it's been 2 years, Barry. You can't keep a shrine forever. It's not healthy. I set down the chip bowl. I walked to the back door, put on my coat and my shoes, and I walked outside. Not because I was going anywhere, just because I needed to be somewhere that was still mine, even if it was only a strip of backyard in October in British Columbia, wet leaves on the ground and the bird feeders swaying. I stood out there for about 7 minutes. Then I went back inside, picked up my phone, and went upstairs to my bedroom, the only room in the house that still fully felt like mine, and I called my lawyer. His name is Gordon Whitfield, and he'd done Margaret's estate work, and I trusted him completely. I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always appreciated about him. Barry, he said when I'd finished, do you want them out? Yes, I said. It was the first time I'd said it out loud to another person. It felt strange, and then it felt clean. He walked me through it. Because this was British Columbia, and they had technically been residing in my home for more than 8 months, there were tenancy protections to navigate. Not impossible, but not instant. He recommended I serve what's called a 2-month notice to end tenancy. Since it wasn't a formal rental arrangement, they had no lease, and he said I should do it correctly, in writing, dated and witnessed. Do it Monday, he said. Don't wait, and document everything going forward. I did not go back downstairs to my own party that night. I told my daughter the next morning. I sat her down at the kitchen table, early, before Dwight was up, and I told her directly. I said, I love you. I love my granddaughter. But this isn't working, and I need you to find somewhere else to live. I'm going to do this the proper way, through a formal notice so everything is documented. You have 2 months. She cried. It was a hard conversation. Some of the things she said during it were unkind. She said I was choosing a chair over her family, which is the kind of thing people say when they don't want to look at the real issue. I told her I wasn't choosing anything over her. I was choosing to still have a home to invite her to. Dwight came downstairs in the middle of it. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his housecoat and he said, What's going on? I looked at him and said, I'm giving you formal written notice today that this arrangement ends in 2 months. Gordon Whitfield's office will send the paperwork this afternoon. He opened his mouth, closed it. That patient, slightly pitying expression tried to reassemble itself on his face and couldn't quite manage it. You can't just, he started. Gordon's number is on the paperwork, I said. If you have questions, call him. I poured myself a cup of coffee and went to the living room and sat down in my chair. The 2 months were not pleasant. I won't pretend they were. There were cold silences and one very loud argument that I walked away from. Dwight tried, in the 3rd week, to approach me about extending the timeline. He was friendly about it in a way that reminded me of his car salesman charm, and I recognized it clearly for what it was this time. I said the date stood. What surprised me was my granddaughter. She was 8 years old and remarkably perceptive. About 3 weeks before they moved out, she knocked on my bedroom door in the evening. I was reading. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed, in that solemn way children have when they've decided to talk to you like an adult. Grandpa, she said, are you mad at me? No, I said, and I meant it absolutely. I am not even a little bit mad at you, not 1%. Dad says you're making us leave. I thought about how to answer that. Your dad and I have different ideas about how this house should work, I said. That's a grown-up problem, and it has nothing to do with how much I love you. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Dad says the same thing when he and Mom fight. 8 years old. I told her that no matter where she lived, she was always welcome in this house, that Saturdays were still ours if she wanted them, that the birdhouse we'd built was hers and would stay on the back porch until she wanted to take it somewhere. She nodded very seriously and went back to bed. They moved out on a Wednesday in December. My daughter and her found them a two-bedroom apartment in New Westminster, not cheap, but manageable on her salary, which had always been the real foundation of their finances, though Dwight had never made that easy to see. They hired a small moving company, the kind you book through a Facebook group. By 4 in the afternoon, the main floor was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 9 months. I moved my coffee maker back to where it belonged. I called the newspaper and reinstated the delivery. Then I sat down in my chair. Paul came over that Friday evening. We had takeout from the Thai place on Kingsway that we'd been going to since the 90s, and we watched the hockey game, and at some point he said, "You all right?" I thought about it honestly. "I think I am," I said. I heard from my daughter more than I expected to. Not immediately, there were a few weeks of silence, which I respected, but by February she called. Not about Dwight, not about the house, just to talk. She told me things were difficult, but she was managing. She told me my granddaughter had made a friend in the new neighborhood and was doing well at school. She didn't apologize for any specific thing. Neither did I. Somewhere in that phone call we agreed, without saying it directly, to let the wound close on its own without picking at it. My granddaughter comes on Saturdays. We've continued the birdhouse project into a full-scale bird feeding station. 3 feeders, a bird bath, a little wooden identification chart she painted herself. She knows the difference between a chickadee and a nuthatch now. I know this because she corrects me when I get it wrong, very patiently, with the tone of someone dealing with a person who doesn't fully understand how birds work. She gets that from me, I think. I'm not going to tell you everything worked out perfectly. My relationship with my daughter is still finding its footing. There are things between us that haven't been said and probably won't be, not fully. That's the way of it with family sometimes. You carry the thing together, even if you carry it differently. But this is what I know. My home is mine again. I sleep well. I read my paper in the morning. I sit in my chair in the evening and watch the light change over the backyard and think about Margaret and feel, not happiness exactly, but something steady, something that's been there all along, underneath everything, waiting for me to clear the space to feel it again. I should have set the terms from the beginning. I know that now. I should have said, on the very first day, here is how this works, here is what I need, here is the line. Not unkindly, just clearly. If you're sitting somewhere right now reading this and you recognize any part of this story, if you said just until we get back on our feet to yourself and you're still saying it a year later, I want to tell you something. You are allowed to have your chair back. It's still your house. It was always your house. And the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and honestly, in the long run, for them, is to remember that.